We're 30 minutes away from the ark, so let's get there. So we'll begin this evening. Exodus 24. We have new faces. Everybody say your first name. Brenda, you remember your first name? Just kind of raise your hand, say your first name. We'll go around the room.
Jean. David.
Right.
Jody.
Ron.
Me. Marsha.
Malcolm?
And I'm Tim. Thank you all. Okay. You really looked in there, Naoko? All right. And what did you see? You can tell them.
So I think I'm okay.
You saw a styrofoam support stick that's holding it, keeping it from collapsing inward. So, the staff is not, it's Aaron's staff and it's not in there yet. Nothing is in there. Nothing is in there. All right. God has just given the commandments and some of the moral law, and now he's going to confirm the covenant with his people. This is at the foot of Mount Sinai, 1446 BC, a few months after April. So May, June, July, maybe about this time of year, whatever it is. And he said to Moses, "Come up to the Lord, you and Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, and 70 of the elders of Israel. You are to worship at a distance, but Moses alone is to approach the Lord. The others must not come near, and the people may not come up with him." It's probably a much more interesting Bible class that Mark's got going there. That is a delightful shade of red. I like that a lot. I was going to mention that if you've seen MASH, there's an episode where the camp goes to is going to be dry. This is after, I think it's after Henry Blake goes and before they get Colonel Potter, and Frank Burns is in charge for a little while, and he cancels alcohol on the base. And he gets Father Mulcahy to preach a sermon. And in the sermon, it's a passage about Nadab and Abihu. And William Christopher keeps saying Nadab and Abihu. It always drives me crazy. Nadab and of course, Klinger's got him taking a little tip of something so he can get through this difficult sermon. And he's completely smashed out of his mind as he's trying to say Nadab and Abihu. But anyway, it's Nadab and Abihu. But not that it's a big deal, but it sits in my head a little bit. All right. By the way, who were Nadab and Abihu? Aaron's oldest two sons. Aaron had 4 sons. These are the oldest 2. They're going to be the first 2 priests of Israel. God hasn't got that quite going yet, but they're obviously here in the making, in the running, as it were. And they're supposed to go up with these 70 elders. If my calculator math is correct, 70 elders means 5 or 6 from each tribe, more or less. 12 tribes, right? So, half dozen from each tribe or so. And they're going to go up, partway up Mount Sinai. The people are supposed to stay off the mountain. Don't even touch the base of the mountain. And if you can imagine Mount Sinai, I've got it. Imagine if you took your toaster to the beach, okay? And you put your toaster in the sand so that the sand comes up to the bottom of the toaster. Because Mount Sinai suddenly juts up out of the sand in southern Sinai. So you can tell, right, what is the mountain and what is not the mountain. What's the desert floor and that's kind of, it's a little bit less dramatic than that, but you can tell pretty much. So the guys go up partway up the mountain, not all the way up, but partway. And the people stay down below. And they're even supposed to keep their animals. Remember that verse from a few chapters ago? They're even supposed to keep the critters off. So keep everything off the mountain. This is holy ground. And so no one's to approach the Lord. The others must not come near, and the people may not come up. When Moses went and told the people all the Lord's words and laws, they responded with one voice, "Everything the Lord has said we will do." And Moses then wrote down everything the Lord had said. He got up early the next morning and built an altar at the foot of the mountain and set up 12 stone pillars representing the 12 tribes of Israel. What did Moses write down? Was it the 10 Commandments? Or was it everything from the 10 Commandments up to this verse? Everything the Lord had said. Remember, we just had a couple of chapters of other laws and things about sacrifices and things. And I'm not sure that I can say that. There are some pretty smart pastors and going all the way back to the probably the church fathers that think this is just the 10 Commandments. I'm going to say it could be the rest of it. It's just a couple of chapters here. And why would Moses have written it down? So he could relay it to the people and get it right. He's already beginning to write what? The book of Exodus. He's taken notes. And he'll incorporate this very exactingly. It makes perfect sense to me that Moses would listen to the Lord, and then he or his scribe, who was his secretary, by the way, his scribe? Joshua. He'll be mentioned later on here, but Joshua gets to go up with Moses every time he goes. So Joshua is writing it down for Moses, and here we go. So he got up early the next morning, built an altar, set up 12 stone pillars. Does that remind you of anything? This is the first worship area with Israel as not just a nation, but now a religion. This is their first worship space. 12 pillars and an altar. Does that suggest anything to you, what it might have looked like? Moses didn't have any directions. He just put up 12 pillars. If you had to put up 12 pillars, would you put them in a line, in a circle, in a triangle, in a square? What would you do? In an arc?
Some older churches used to have like 12 pillars, not really pillars, but the wood part where you go up the pews.
Mm-hmm. Ron?
3, 4 sides.
4 sides, 3, 3, 3. Almost any of these is going to end up looking from a distance like a famous structure with just basically pillars and nothing else. Isn't it? It's going to look like Stonehenge. In some manner, it's going to kind of look like that. It's just an open space with some pillars and an altar that Moses makes. And it's going to kind of look like that. It was an ancient way of doing stuff like this. And not exactly, Stonehenge is built so you can tell astronomical details like, especially when's the equinox going to be and therefore the solstice and some other things. But this was just pillars and this thing. So this is what Moses built. And not big pillars. This is just what a guy and a couple of kids can, lift up. They found some boulders and they just tipped them up. Just like Jacob had done, after he took the boulder he had been using for a pillow. Come on in, guys. Oh, he said first name. So since you're late, you have to do it now.
Aaron.
Welcome, Aaron and Sarah. Do you have correcting to do tonight, Sarah?
No, I don't.
It's soon, isn't it? It's soon.
I'm going to have so much this year. The teaching is great.
That's right. Congratulations. All right. We're 4 verses into our chapters, so we'll keep going. So he sent young Israelite men, and they offered burnt offerings and sacrificed young bulls as fellowship offerings to the Lord. Moses took half the blood and put it in bowls, and the other half he sprinkled on the altar. So half of the offering blood gets sprinkled on the altar. They usually used a plant called hyssop for this. It was a bushy plant that looked a little bit like like cedar or something like that, but with lots and lots of sticks on the end. They used it for painting and so forth. In fact, when they painted the blood on the door in Egypt, they had used hyssop to do that. And hyssop also is a little scratchy, and it holds together even when you use it for something like this. It doesn't disintegrate. So David will say, "Cleanse me with hyssop," which is we're not talking about that verse, but that's the way that ancients often would clean themselves. A classic way for a Roman or a Greek to take a bath was to use oil, sand, and a stick. Oil them up, get the sand on there, rub it around, and then scrape it off. Clean. But hyssop so with the hyssop though, spatter, spatter, spatter on the altar. What's the other half for? We're coming to that. They saved some of it. Then he took the book of the covenant and read it to the people. And they responded, "We will do everything the Lord has said. We will obey." Moses then took the blood, sprinkled it on the people. This is the other half of the blood. So he spatters it. If I took a paintbrush full of blood and kind of gave it a flick, it'd hit you, right? Hit your clothes. How do you get blood out of clothes? What's the recipe for getting blood out of your clothes? Cold water. If it's somebody else's blood. If it's yours, you know what you can use? Do you know this? The pH of your blood and of your saliva is the same. So your own spit will get your blood out of your clothes. Yeah. And sometimes a mom will be able to do it with baby's blood. If they get some baby's blood on them, or for whatever reason, it'll come off. Yeah. There, you'll learn something really new tonight. But this moment, Edersheim has a commentary on the Old Testament, and he says this. This was the most important ceremony in the whole history of Israel. By this one sacrifice, which was never renewed, Israel was formally set apart as the people of God, as it lay the foundation of all the sacrificial worship which followed. So this was the first covenant of blood. This is the blood of the covenant. What does that sound like to you? The communion liturgy. This is what Jesus gives as the communion liturgy. This is the blood of the new covenant poured out for you. The difference is, this was the blood of the law covenant. What Jesus does in the Lord's Supper is he gives us the blood of the gospel covenant. The law covenant was to, in the words of the Apostle Paul in Galatians, enslaved the people of Israel to the law. You're now bound by the law. Keep it perfectly. And of course, can we do that? No. Peter even says even our ancestors couldn't do that. I just was writing about this today. Jesus' apostles on a cool spring evening could not even keep the request, watch for an hour. We can't keep the commands of God. And so what did God do? First of all, he showed us this with the law, and then he offered his own son to atone for all of that, so we would know that we are free through Christ, and that salvation is only through faith in Christ alone. So the blood of the covenant the Lord has made in accordance with all these words. Moses and Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, and all the 70 elders of Israel went up and saw the God of Israel. Let me read the 2 verses and then we'll talk about it. We'll have to unpack all of this. They saw the God of Israel. Under his feet was something like a pavement made of sapphire, clear as the sky itself. But God did not raise his hand against these leaders of the Israelites. They saw God and they ate and drank. Now, we're not going to be told what they saw. It says they saw God. What does that mean? Well, how had God appeared to Abraham? as a man walking out of the desert and saying, "What's for supper?" That's in Genesis 19. The Lord shows up with some angels and says, "We're on our way to Sodom." And Abraham and Sarah treat them as guests. Sarah, anybody here remember? Pastor Henning had an amazing sermon about this. This is like 24 years ago. Still vivid in my head, where Sarah went and got basically 3 big laundry baskets full of flour, mixed it with oil and water and salt, and made that much bread dough. Can you imagine making that much bread dough? How long did it take her? You know, and she baked it all. She baked all this bread. They killed an animal, and they got fruit and wine and everything. And the Lord, and they just sit, and the Lord and Abraham just sit outside having a beer and talking. Maybe there wasn't a beer. I forget the whole verse. But they're out and they're conversing, and then the angels head down to Sodom, and the Lord stays with Abraham, and Sarah makes a promise about their child coming. But this big meal, or did God appear the way he had appeared to Moses in the burning bush? Or the way he appeared to Moses later and Elijah by showing only his back? Or how did God appear? Or was it a blinding light, like God appearing to Paul on the road to Damascus? Well, it doesn't tell us. It's one of these or another one. I don't know. It's one of these. But God appears. But then Moses describes some other things. And I'm always struck by the authors of the Bible when they talk about seeing God or seeing heaven. Their first comment is often about the floor. I got to see the floor. And it's like, I can't tell you about what was above it, but I got to see the floor. In Ezekiel and in Revelation, you get these passages about the floor of heaven and things like, and here too, the pavement made of sapphire. What color is sapphire? Blue. Yeah. Is it like your blouse? Do you think? You wearing a sapphire tonight? Way to go. All right. But also clear as the sky. So this gorgeous color that they didn't know how to make. They couldn't make sapphire color with any kind of pigment. But and we're going to talk about pigment tonight yet. But clear as the sky, and almost as if they're looking up through the floor at God from below. You know, this thing. But God has, since it's the floor under his feet, that's the important symbol. That God has his feet on all of creation. Because this sapphire floor, clear as the sky, represents the sky. God's feet are on the sky. He has authority over everything. And we just let that happen. That's exactly right. And God did not raise his hand against these elders. They saw God. What did they do? They ate and drank. They got to have a meal. Who brought the meal? God did. Instead of God showing up to Abraham and saying, "What's for supper?" the Israelite leaders came up to God and he said, "Hey, let's have supper." It's pretty cool, whatever it was. The Lord said to Moses, "Come up to me on the mountain and stay here, and I will give you the tablets of stone with the law and commands I have written for their instruction." So God is going to give this to Moses. Moses set out with Joshua, his aide. There's Joshua. And Moses went up on the mountain of God, so he climbs up to the top of the toaster, if you will. Please, in your mind, don't worry about the slots where the bread goes. It's flat up there, okay? I know how, that's how my brain works. Every illustration limps. Or maybe I should have said a brick. Would that have been better? A cinder block? No, that has holes in it too. Never mind. He said to the elders, "Wait for us until we come back to you. Aaron and Hur are with you, and anyone involved in a dispute can go to them." As he's leaving, Moses' first thought is, you guys are going to argue while I'm gone. Who else talks like that in the Bible? Joseph. When the brothers come for food during the famine, and Joseph sends the brothers back to get Dad, the last thing he says is, don't argue on the way. He knows his brothers, and Moses knows his brothers as well. You guys are going to fight about stuff, so you've got Aaron and Hur. Who's Hur? That's a grammatically correct sentence. Who is Hur? When my wife went to visit her sister, and my youngest niece was there at the time. She's now in her 30s, but she was 3 at the time. And when Kath would drive up, she'd say, Hur is here, Hur is here, Hur is here. She goes, we're waiting for her to come. Well, Hur is here. So this is the guy who held up Moses' arms a couple of chapters ago with the battle against the Amalekites before they got to Sinai. This is Hur, as it were. Yeah. And so Moses says, wait here. So the elders are still there as that buffer, like partway up the mountain. Moses and Joshua go up and the people are down below. They can call to Aaron and Hur and they'll come down and they'll judge disputes. When Moses went up on the mountain, the cloud covered it, and the glory of the Lord settled on Mount Sinai. And for 6 days the cloud covered the mountain. And on the 7th day the Lord called to Moses from within the cloud. I'll just mention this here, that the Lord, we've seen this before, the Lord likes these 6 days and then a 7th day references, like to the days of creation, to our week and so forth. Here's another one where this happens. And to the Israelites, the glory of the Lord looked like a consuming fire on the top of the mountain. So from below, it looked like, on TV, most of us have seen forest fires in California, where there'll be a whole hillside or mountain all on fire. Not a volcanic fire, but just a forest fire. And the smoke is just racing up into the sky. It's burning everything. But Moses, in verse 18, what does he do? He enters the cloud as he went up the mountain. What was it like for Moses? Is it a forest fire? It's a cloud. I've been in both. What's the difference between a forest fire and a cloud? So in a fire, you can't see, you can't breathe. It's acrid, it makes you sick, right? Who here has been inside of a cloud? All of us in New Ulm. What do we call them here? Fog, yeah. When I was a missionary, I took my sons and my wife up to Mount Rainier. It's one of the highest mountains in Washington State. We went up more than a couple thousand feet, or 1,000 something, 1,200 feet. I forget what it was. I don't remember how tall Mount Rainier is, but it's big. It's got its own weather. It can be blistering hot down here, and there's snow up there. So we got up just a little bit more than halfway, and we were in a cloud. And with a group we were with, some of the kids were like, oh, it's foggy. No, it's a cloud. And the difference is, the cloud, it doesn't burn the eyes. It's not acrid. It doesn't smell terrible. You can breathe. In fact, it's perfectly pleasant. There's no big deal about it. And the glory of the Lord is often like this, where to somebody on the outside it looks like this fire. Looks like one thing but then you're inside it, like in the Mount of Transfiguration. James, Peter, and John are there with Jesus, and it's just like they're inside of a cloud. No big deal. Perfectly delightful. Moses enters the cloud as he went up the mountain, and he stayed on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights. And what did he eat? Say it again, Marcia.
Either the Lord provided or he made it so it wasn't necessary for him to.
Yeah, I think those are the two best answers. We're not told that like Joshua brought up a bunch of loaves of bread and butter and stuff, but either the Lord provided for them and he had just done that, or he made it so that it didn't make any difference. So who did go 40 days and 40 nights without eating and drinking? Jesus. Yeah. But at the end of which, The text says he was hungry. Yeah. Yeah, so Moses is now on the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights, and the elders are evidently partway up, and the Israelites are down below.
What does the 40 represent in this?
40 occurs again and again in the Bible, and it's often some kind of a number of purification. 4, as a numeral in the Bible, when it has symbolic value, stands for the earth. That it's often compared with, in their way of thinking, with the 4 winds. There was a wind that came in off of the sea. We would call that the west wind. There was a wind that came in out of the desert, and they called that the east wind. There was a wind that came from the Arabah, which was a terrible wind. That's the south wind, we would call it. And there was a wind that brought storms and rain down from Mount Hermon and so forth. We would call that the north wind. They didn't have the compass points that we do. They just talked about the direction the wind would come from. We named our compass points after those things. So, but something like a magnetic compass just wouldn't have occurred to them. There would be no reason to have it. But they talked about the 4 winds. And the way that the wind direction changed depending on the season of the year and sometimes the time of day, because the winds reverse sometimes during the day, where you get a land breeze and a sea breeze and things like that going on. But so that numeral 4 is the number of the earth, and then multiplied for the sake of holiness by 10 to 40. And then you have these periods of cleansing on the earth, of purification. 40 days for Moses. There was a 40-day period for Elijah also. Jesus spent 40 days before his ministry, and then Jesus had 40 days from his resurrection before his ascension, before returning back to the Lord. There are other examples of this, but this 40 days thing. And of course, how long did it rain when the Lord destroyed the earth with water? 40 days and 40 nights. Then they were on the sea a lot longer than that, but that was the cleansing. So I think that's the significance, Kevin. Good question. Thanks for asking it. They didn't ask that this morning. All right. Chapter 25. Now to the offerings and other things. So the Lord said to Moses, "Tell the Israelites to bring me an offering. You are to receive the offering for me from each man whose heart prompts him to give." And the Lord does not specify amounts, but he will say what kinds of things he wants. What is this for? This offering is for building the sanctuary. Okay, so he's not asking for thousands of sheep or something like that. He is going to ask for ram's hides and things, but this is mainly building materials and things like that. So here is what we get for the list. And if you need to know what something is, just stop me as I'm reading, okay? Or I'm going to stop myself too. These are the offerings you are to receive from them. First of all, gold, silver. We all know where gold and silver come from. Those are not alloys. They're just mined from the ground, right? Yeah. When I'm reading my Bible year to year, I always shudder when I read that chapter in Job about mining, because it's a guy hanging by a rope in a hole when it's dark and it's cold and he's swinging back and forth. And I'm thinking, would I trust a rope? An ancient rope? And that's how he's mining for gold and silver. And bronze. I thought it was my responsibility as someone named Smith to learn the recipe for bronze. Does anybody else know Ron, do you know the recipe for bronze?
It's copper mostly and tin.
Or arsenic.
Well, yeah,
That in ancient times they would use arsenic or tin. It was not. There are other ways that you can manipulate copper, and one of them is to add zinc, which gets you brass. And in some older translations of the Bible, brass is used here, and in other places they didn't have zinc. There aren't zinc deposits in Israel, and they wouldn't have been brass, it would have been bronze. It's around 85% copper, 15% something else, usually tin. And the tin serves to harden up the copper so it's not so malleable. And it deepens the color a little bit, but mainly it makes it much harder. So you can give an edge to it for a weapon. And even something as long as a sword will not bend. So it's a pretty good thing to have around, bronze. Blue, purple, and scarlet yarn. How did they dye stuff blue, purple, and scarlet? What, did they go down to Kundert's? Sorry, that's my childhood. That's the fabric store in Poynette when I was a kid, where we had to buy our Fayed uniforms. And but how did they get these different colors? Where did they go?
Sea creatures.
Usually it was sea creatures. Yeah, it was cuttlefish, octopus, red shrimp or something like that, or they would catch them, basically dry them, and then pulverize the dried remains, and then they would mix that with oil in some way and then dye the yarn that way. That's pretty much what they did. And it was their method of dyeing was very similar to our method of what I would call tie-dyeing. If you ever did that when you were a kid, you kind of have a bucket of this stuff and you just dip without the rubber bands, but yeah. Fine linen and goat hair, so two different qualities. The goat hair is going to be what? Tougher than the fine linen. Ram skins dyed red and hides of sea cows. Let's look at a dugong or manatee. This is courtesy National Geographic. You can see it on my yellow square there. But however, it's not so certain that it was manatees or dugongs. It could have been simply seals. Are those clean animals or unclean animals? As fish, they would be completely unclean. They don't have scales or fins. Well, then as a mammal, it's absolutely unclean because it doesn't have a split hoof and does not chew the cud. So however you categorize, and Moses would have called it a fish, by the way. Moses would have called it a fish. Because Moses only has 5 categories of animals. Swimmers, flyers, bats are flyers, birds. And then you have wild animals. That's Dorothy from The Wizard of Oz would call it lions and tigers and bears, right? And then creepy crawlies, everything from centipedes to snakes. And then domestic animals. But those are Moses' only categories. That's the whole taxonomy of the world for Moses. So I don't know if the sea cows here are seals or walruses or dugongs. Why did he want them? Waterproof, to put a tarp over the entire tabernacle. That's what it was for. But a curiosity that the Lord used both clean and unclean animals for. Of course, they're not going to eat them. Just as the Israelites were allowed to use donkeys, which are unclean animals, they could use donkeys for the service and things like that. And for that matter, dogs. There are all kinds of things that are unclean that were in the Israelites' lives. They just didn't eat them. So, sea cows, acacia wood. Acacia wood is a smallish hardwood tree that grows in the desert. Still grows in the Sinai desert today. I think that the ones that are around today are a lot smaller than the ones that were growing in Moses' time. But an acacia tree could be just about as tall as this room. And a hardwood would often kind of twist and bend and was quite elegant, very probably because of the winds of the desert, twisting it when it was immature and so forth. But nice big hardwood trees, and they had lots of them. So cut down some acacia trees and we'll build stuff out of it. That's what they did. And olive oil for the light. How do you get oil out of an olive? Just in case somebody doesn't know. You squeeze it, yeah. And for the fragrant incense, later on, the anointing oil and the fragrant incense, spices for that, the recipe is going to be given later on in Scripture. It's not given here. But it's a forbidden recipe. It's in the Bible, but they're told when they get it, nobody makes this except for the special anointing oil or incense for the tabernacle. Nobody gets to make it for themselves. So, and then onyx stones and other gems to be mounted on the ephod and the breastpiece. An ephod is like the top half of a kitchen apron. Okay, around the neck and then tie it behind the back. It's this part. And then the breastpiece is the breastplate of the high priest. This bronze thing that he wore with 12 stones in it. And the stones were not all diamonds and rubies, but they were some of them were onyx and some were just colored jasper and things like that. The kind of stones that I think in this room, and women indulge me for a second, every guy in this room probably brought a cool stone in from outdoors as a kid and said, "Mom, look at this." And she probably answered, "That's nice. Now take it back outside." But that kind of cool rocks. Guys, did you all do this too at some point in your life? And I certainly. You did too? Atta girl. Way to go, Marcia.
I still do.
I've known some women who shudder at the thought. Like, no way. But, anyway. I'm sure Jean is probably like that. Like, not bringing that in my house. So, done that. Then have them make a sanctuary for me, and I will dwell among them. The word sanctuary is ohel, with an emphasis on the O, O-H-E-L. It's the Hebrew word that often is translated tent, but it means any kind of a dwelling that's fabric, usually. That's a temporary dwelling of some kind, but it doesn't necessarily have to have a top. So, for example, the tabernacle had an inner piece that was a tent with a cover, right? But it had an outer piece that was just a whole bunch of fabric pieces between posts. It was more like a fence than a tent, but it was massive. A very, very large thing that they built. But God says, make a sanctuary. The main thing with it being this kind of a sanctuary is that it was portable. And God is going to give them plans for exactly how they take the thing down and how they put it back up again. In fact, it's so exacting that certain families of certain tribes were responsible for certain things in the sanctuary. Only one family of Levites could take the inner dishes and things out of the holy place. They wrapped them up and they carried them. A different family took down the posts and the hardware of the holy place, and they carried the posts and things on their shoulders, or carried the bases, or whatever. Totally different family rolled up the fabric and carried that with them. So everybody had their task, and that way, by being family, God accounted for everything. This is, you heard the expression, you had one job. Well, that's what he did. He gave them one job. And so it might be that your immediate family was responsible for the fourth piece of fabric rolled up on the east side of the sanctuary. So when it came time to take it down, you'd go up there, and you and your dad would untie it, roll it up very carefully, sling it over your shoulders. That's what you're responsible for. When you get to where the sanctuary is going to be set up, that's where you go. You find your two posts from these other two families, and you tie it back up there. It was identical when it got set up as when it got taken down. There's no difference at all. Make sense? God accounted for all of it, and that's what you do. Okay. The ark. That's why this is out tonight. So, were you guys here when I explained this earlier? I made this contraption for Good Friday in 2021. And tonight is its last hurrah in the church. It's going away tonight. So, Philip is getting it?
I don't know, I forgot to bring the truck, I brought the car.
Oh, you did?
I brought the car.
Oh, it's going away tonight.
Kevin's got a truck.
I need to bring my truck.
Do you? Would you like to take it away later in the week,
I could do it tomorrow, I just didn't remember bringing the
or do you really want it for the grandkids?
No.
Okay. Okay. Let's move on. We'll
I know exactly what would happen.
okay.
They would love you for it.
For about 10 minutes.
Would not look very
For about
nice
10 minutes.
back there.
I'm not sure their parents would love them for it. In a house now with 7 people and and a dog, there's only so much living room space, and this would not fit in the living room. Not very easily. Maybe the front yard.
That's about it.
Yeah.
After a while, it fit very well.
Izzy might like this for about 10 minutes. But, okay, the ark. Make this tabernacle and all its furnishings exactly like the pattern I will show you. So God says a pattern. Moses does not draw a picture, as far as we know. That's not recorded as scripture. What does Moses do? He takes notes. He writes it all out longhand. I mean, some people think in terms of pictures. Some people think in terms of words. I probably would have sketched with notes, but that's not what we have in the Bible. Moses writes it out very exactly. This is what we are to do. So have them make a chest of acacia wood. And the word for chest here is aron. This kind of a chest was a box with a cover that could be used as a coffin, an aron. Later in the Bible, earlier in the Bible, we have 2 other arks besides this one. Do you remember what they were? There are 3 arks. The other 2 floated. So Noah's ark, which was a teba, and the ark Moses was put in by his mother was a teba. This basket is the same word for ark as in Noah's ark. However, that word teba also gets used for the coffin that Joseph's bones get put in to be brought up out of Egypt. So there are all kinds of ways of using this word, and are these 2 words between Aron and Teba. What's the difference? It seems to me, and I might be wrong about this. It seems that Teba, which was the ship, Noah's. And how long was Noah's ark? Football field and a half. How wide was it? 3/4 of a football field. And 3 stories. That is a huge, long, oblong thing, right? Same word for Joseph's coffin or sarcophagus coming up out of Egypt. So it seems to me that maybe the oblong version is the teba, but the that's the tent. The aron is more of this boxy thing. They could both be used for a coffin, but this is not super long, is it? It's kind of more, Christmas present sized box thing. So maybe that's the difference. Otherwise, they're just 2 words that have the very similar meaning. So whichever it was. Anyway, make one out of acacia wood, 2.5 cubits long. A cubit is how long? Can you all hold up your cubit? You do this. It's from your elbow to your fingertips. This Ark of the Covenant is built using my cubit. My cubit happens to be exactly 18 inches long, which is what the footnotes of your Bible say is the ideal cubit. My foot is also exactly 12 inches long, and my thumb is exactly 1 inch. But then again, as I tell my sons, I'm perfectly proportioned, and I have the strength of 10 men. And my sons agree with me. So there. But anyway, this is built with an 18-inch cubit. This would be the actual size, approximately, within 1/4 of an inch of the ark. Can you imagine that thing? Wood overlaid with gold, solid gold cover. It weighed a lot. I think that John Oppitz and I figured minimum of 500 pounds and maybe a little bit more. And took between 4 and 8 guys to carry. I think 8 would have been wiser, but they used not wagons, but poles. So we're coming to that. So 2.5 cubits long, 1.5 cubits wide, 1.5 cubits high, the same height as width. Overlay it with pure gold, both inside and out, and make a gold molding around it. What's a molding? We have them in this room. Up against between the wall and the ceiling, and against the floor and the wall. Those are moldings. You might have them in your home. They might be smaller crown moldings or quarter round or something like that. What's the purpose of a molding? It has 2 purposes. One is to conceal the gap between, whatever the wall's made out of and the ceiling and floor and carpet and so forth. The other one is to help fasten what the wall's made out of and keep it in place. A wallpaperer likes to have a molding also, so the wallpaper won't peel as quickly over time. And the purpose of a molding here on the Ark of the Covenant, I don't have them on. I had to make this quickly on Maundy Thursday. And I kept thinking, I haven't started my sermon yet. It was for Good Friday. Yeah, well. Anyway, the purpose of the molding here would be, they were hammering strips of gold onto the wood here. And so this is going to last centuries. So to keep the gold from peeling back or looking bad or whatever over time, molding would keep it nicely in place and make a nice, neat looking object. Not at all what my C- art project does here. Okay. All right, cast 4 gold rings for it and fasten them to its 4 feet with 2 rings on one side, 2 rings on the other. What error did I make on this Ark of the Covenant? The rings are attached to the top of the feet, not to the bottom of the feet. Although it just says attached to the feet, right? Well, I kind of cheated here, didn't I? Forgive me. My sinful human nature thinks if I have to lift a box this shape with hundreds of pounds of pure gold on top, and I have to carry it on my shoulders, it's going to be top heavy in the extreme. And my failure to wrap my head around God's word says maybe the ring should have been higher up, but God said by the feet, and I think that I just have this wrong.
Take the cover off, flip it over, put the cover on the bottom, and look like
Easy peasy. It's all you'd have to do. Also, all the other things God had them build, the table of the showbread and stuff, they all had rings on the top. God even specifies it. This one had rings by the feet. So, Mark?
That would cause them to be far more careful transporting than
Yeah, and who am I to say that this thing that weighs, 500 pounds, a quarter of a ton, wouldn't be pretty stable if we're just, hefting it up there, and it's that wide and everything, and yeah, you have to be pretty careful with it. So remember, you touch this thing the wrong way. What happened to Uzzah in Chronicles? He dies because the wagon tipped over, so all right. Then make poles of acacia wood and overlay them with gold. Most of the pictures that you'll find online of the Ark of the Covenant do not have golden poles. They have wooden poles. They were wood, but they were overlaid with gold. Insert the poles into the rings on the sides of the chest to carry it. The poles are to remain in the rings of this ark. They are not to be removed. The poles were so long that we're told that when the ark was actually set in the sanctuary, in the Holy of Holies, the poles stuck out through the tent. So that meant that they were more than 15 feet long. So that's a good long pole. That's a 4-man pole. Then put in the ark the testimony, which I will give you. We talked about this earlier. What else went in the ark besides the two tablets of the Ten Commandments. Aaron's staff that budded, which could have been quite long if he put it in diagonally from the bottom corner to the top corner. We measured that and we came up with it's close to 6 foot inside there on the diagonal. And also one other thing, a jar of manna that did not spoil. Yeah, so kept all that in there. Make an atonement cover of pure gold, 2.5 cubits long, 1.5 cubits wide, and make 2 cherubim out of hammered gold at the ends of the cover. So that thing on top is supposed to be 2 cherubim with wings. Again, Maundy, Thursday evening. I haven't written my sermon yet. I just was desperate to get this thing done. And I think that I was hanging on to Abigail during part of this construction period. I'm like hot gluing with one hand, and I've got a baby. So make 1 cherub on one end and the second cherub on the other end. Make the cherubim of one piece with the cover. So not bolted or anything. They were one piece with a cast together. How could they cast things? Well, they're not that far from the Red Sea, and you have wet sand, and you make something out of another material, wood or whatever. Then you inlay it in the sand, and what do you do then? You make a wax version of it, typically. Pour in the gold will dissolve the wax, and then you have a cast of this thing. It's essentially how it gets done. The cherubim are to have their wings spread upward, overshadowing the cover with them. The cherubim are to face each other, looking toward the cover. And I have some thoughts about that. Is it mostly about reverence? Having their eyes on what's below and not on God above? The fact that they're there meant that you couldn't put, and being a guy, I always think, well, you could set something on top of that. No, you couldn't. The cherubim are there. Also, nobody can try to sit on it. It'd be more difficult to get on and off and so forth. So there are all kinds of reasons. But also in architecture, in I should say decorative architecture of the same period. For example, in Egypt, they often would have winged creatures guarding over something that is sacred. So the Lord says, you can go ahead and do this, but you're not going to make like some weird animal or a griffin or something. They're going to be cherubim. They're going to be my creatures guarding this. So God, in many cases in the law, God will take what everybody does, but he sanctifies it and says, but you do it this way specifically. So that might have something to do with the cherubim here too. Place the cover on top of the ark and put in the ark the testimony, which I'll give you. There above the cover between the 2 cherubim, that are over the ark of the testimony, I will meet with you and give you all my commands for the Israelites. Specifically, who would get to see God? Just the high priest. So not even Moses, just Aaron would see this. Just the high priest. This is a pretty typical rendering. Again, the poles are not gold, but everything else, it kind of says it. That's basically what's going on there. Most famous for what movie? Raiders of the Lost Ark. Yeah. And when I was in college, at the seminary, and we took elective classes on other languages, Edomite, Moabite, Philistin, Aramaic, and so forth. We learned how to read the Aramaic writing on the staff of Ra, also from Raiders of the Lost Ark. That was our final quiz. So wanted to make sure we were able to do that because our congregation is bound to ask us at some point. So Dr. Brug was always careful. Okay, let's get you up to speed here. Notice as we move now to the table. Brenda, tell me about your house. I'm going to stop you, but start. What should we know about your home?
It's a split level.
Okay, stop. Sarah, tell me about yours.
It's 4 bedrooms.
Okay. Marcia, tell me about yours.
It's a 16 by 80 foot.
Okay, stop. You guys are describing kind of the size and so forth, things like that. This morning, people started with where their house was. Also, common way of talking about it. What does God do? He starts with, this is where I appear. God starts with the Holy of Holies, and he works his way outward from here. Notice this in everything that God says. It starts with the Holy of Holies. Now he's moving out with the table into the holy place. And then he'll spread out into the tabernacle. And then God will go beyond the tabernacle to give the Israelites exact instructions on where their tribes and families would park outside to make up the entire community of the Israelites. 2 million people. He's going to tell them where each tribe would camp all around. But it starts right here in the middle at the Ark of the Covenant and then moves outwards. Just something to notice. Make a table of acacia wood, more acacia wood, 2 cubits long, so a little bit shorter than this. In fact, how long is 2 cubits? It's from the middle of my chest to the end of my finger. That's 2 cubits. About a yard. Yeah. A cubit wide, so not very wide, and a cubit and a half high. Actually, this is almost the size of my little tiny table here. But on top of it would be 6 loaves of bread, flat bread, about the size of, what would be the right size for the bread? An old 33 1/3 RPM album, okay? Or the cover of a gallon ice cream bucket, okay? Or a dinner plate, if you can imagine, like 2 dinner plates, one on top of the other, like that. And it's stacked, right? Later on, in the time of the tabernacle, evidently, I don't know if they made it this way originally, but they made spindles for the showbread later on so that they would slide it down so it wouldn't fall off, which is a bagel or a donut. Yeah, something like that, but yeah. So overlay it with pure gold and make a gold molding around it. Again, the molding holds the overlay in place. Also make around it a rim a handbreadth wide and put a gold molding on the rim. So sides, so stuff isn't going to easily fall off of it. Why would they worry about stuff maybe falling off of it? They're in Sinai and there are earthquakes. So you make a little fence, about a handbreadth, like this tall, little narrow little lip around there. 4 inches tall, whatever. Make 4 gold rings for the table and fasten them into the 4 corners where the 4 legs are. The rings are to be, does that sound like the Ark of the Covenant? The rings are to be close to the rim to hold the poles used in carrying the table. So here, they're up on top. Make the poles of acacia wood, overlay them with gold, and carry the table with them. This is probably a 4-guy thing and not an 8-guy thing. Make its plates and dishes of pure gold, as well as its pitchers and bowls for the pouring out of offerings. Put the bread of the presence on this table to be before me at all times. The recipe for the bread is later in Leviticus 24. But pitchers and bowls, why? Well, if you brought an offering and you had some old jug that you brought wine in, is that what the Lord wants his wine brought to him with? No, we're going to use the good dishes here on the table so they would put your offering into the good dishes. You've got a bag or something that you brought bread with. Well, no, we're going to put this on the plate and so forth. They're going to use the good dishes. We echoed that in the old days here by having us bring our offerings and putting them in the offering plate. You're at church, right? We use brass plates. Maybe we will again. Board of Elders, yes or no? Still don't know?
It's being studied by people that have opinions.
Being studied by people that have opinions. Let's move on. All right. So this one is missing the sides, but about the size of our portable communion tables. Those are a little bit tall, actually. Then very quickly, the lampstand. In fact, I'm going to show you the pictures because we're out of time. But the lampstand, pure gold, this one is wrong because it's burning candles on top. This is more the actual size and had lamps, actual oil lamps that were trimmed up on top. The whole thing was pure gold. It represented almond blossoms and cups and things like that. But a 7-branch candlestick with 3 on one side, 3 on the other, and 1 in the middle. So it's often referred to as a menorah. And I don't know how big the one was exactly in the tabernacle. The one you see here was in the temple, and we know how big it was and what the base looked like because a Roman general, who later became emperor, in 70 AD stole it when they sacked Jerusalem. And when Titus came back to Rome, they made a bas-relief, an actual sized carving in marble on this victory arch of Titus, showing them the soldiers carrying the stuff they got from the temple in Jerusalem. And one of them was that. It's actually there, carved in marble in Italy. In Rome. So there are other smaller tables. Which one is the table of the showbread? Which one is the table of this and that? Not sure of all of that, but this is definitely the menorah from the holy place. So Solomon, however, didn't just have one. I think Solomon had either 5 or 7, because his holy place was much larger than, it's double the size of the one Moses had. So everything with Solomon's temple was twice as big. And marble. So. And just one final comment about the light here. I mean, otherwise there was no light in the sanctuary, just what they would bring in with censers and stuff. And the light points to Christ, the only true light. John 1, John 8, both mention that. We'll continue here with the furnishings. I should have told you this. There are pictures on the last page. I'm sorry, I forgot to tell you that. There are pictures on the last page, courtesy of the Concordia Study Bible. So there you are. I'll print that again next time. But if you don't mind, we'll continue this way next time. And again, until then, God bless you all. I very sincerely mean this. Thank you very much for letting me do this.
Thank you.
See you next time. You've been listening to Invisible Church, the Bible study podcast from St. Paul's Lutheran Church, New Ulm, Minnesota.